Hi, I'd like to take just a moment to get personal with you and tell you about my own experience with trauma. Before I understood what trauma really is, I would have claimed that I've never had any trauma in my life. I had a very traditional middle class upbringing in the suburbs. I always felt loved, had lots of family and friends around, and I was very, very lucky compared to other people. But in my late 30s, I started having panic attacks and unexplained health issues. The long journey to heal these symptoms eventually brought me to the understanding that the unexplained symptoms were actually my body's response to unknown or misunderstood trauma from my early childhood. For me, it started even before birth. I was conceived right before my father went to Vietnam to fight in the war. And my grandmother, my mother's mother, was very sick, and she passed away just 3 weeks before I was born. So even before I was born, my system was swimming in my mother's stress hormones from the loss of her mother and the fear of not knowing if my father would return home alive. Well, luckily, my dad did return home when I was about 6 months old, and he suffered, as so many soldiers do, with PTSD. So, in those early years, as my nervous system was developing, I had to learn how to navigate the environment that was so stressful, as my parents did their best to cope with PTSD. I was never physically abused, I was loved, and I was well taken care of. But it was really scary being around my dad when he had these symptoms of PTSD. So, as a very young girl, I learned to buffer that fear by checking out, disassociating from physical reality, and I shifted all of my focus and awareness to the spiritual and intellectual realms. I didn't let myself see what was happening in the physical world as a way to buffer that overwhelming experience. So if my dad was angry or he was checked out, it was too scary for me to see it, so I disassociated. And this strategy worked great for me in childhood to manage that fear, but it set me up for many problems in my adult life. I found myself married to a man with severe mental illness. As the years went by, the more severe his mental illness got, the less I noticed how sick he was because my childhood pattern of checking out when my dad was triggered kicked in when my ex husband had episodes with his mental illness. Eventually, his illness got so extreme that this once very kind man became abusive. He even began stalking me, but because of my pattern of dissociating, I didn't realize how dangerous this situation was, really literally until the police and the victim's advocate sat me down to get me to see the truth. But my body had been trying to tell me. I was having panic attacks and unusual, unexplained physical symptoms. And I really had no clue of the level of stress that I was under. I kept thinking that it was just something in my diet was wrong or some kind of environmental toxin and I just needed to detoxify or I needed to meditate more, I needed to exercise more. I was actually stuck in a trauma pattern formed when I was a child that kept me in a state of dissociation and the total inability to see the trauma that I was experiencing in the present moment. And that trauma pattern was causing the unexplained physical symptoms. Now, my story is not unusual. Many people suffer from physical and emotional symptoms that are rooted in unknown or misunderstood trauma. But it can be healed if you know how to address it. So that's why I am passionate about educating people about trauma. I believe the first step in healing is understanding. And I'd love for you to join me in my webinar called The 3 Common Myths About Trauma That Keep You from Healing. So here's what we're going to cover: what trauma is and how it leads to dis-ease, the top 3 common myths about trauma and why these myths prevent healing, and what exactly is needed to heal trauma. So please join me. All you have to do is click on the link below or in the comments section to register for this event. And I really do hope that I see you there.